Good afternoon. My name is Will Miller, and I'm president of the Wallace Foundation. Thank you for joining us, both those here in person and those watching via live stream. You can join the conversation by tweeting your questions using the hashtag #BuildingArtsAudiences, all one word. I'd like to give a special thanks to Laura Walker, President and CEO of New York Public Radio, for hosting us today in this beautiful green space here in New York City. And thanks to her team for making our first live stream event possible. I'd also like to thank our moderator, Kurt Andersen, acclaimed novelist and co-founder and host of Studio 360. He will lead a discussion with our distinguished panelists on building audiences for the arts. We're here today because the arts are fundamental to individuals and to communities. As individuals, we need arts to experience beauty and insight, to help us make sense of our lives, and to envision what is not but might be. As communities, we need art to forge social bonds, to strengthen our economies, and to deepen our understanding of each other, especially when we come from different backgrounds or belief systems. As one of our panelists today, Jane Chu, the chairman of the National Endowment for the Arts, put it, the arts are the heartbeat of our country and of our communities. If the arts are the heartbeat, arts organizations are the vital arteries that allow us to experience great art. There's nothing like being physically present in the moment to watch Alan Cumming do a one-man version of Macbeth, to experience the first mariachi opera, Cruzar la Cara de la Luna, or to be moved to tears by Alvin Ailey's Revelations. And yet, these are challenging times for arts organizations. Data from the National Endowment for the Arts show that attendance rates at performances have generally slipped over the past 3 years, with the steepest declines occurring among young adults, the audiences of the future. That's happened while the number of arts organizations has grown over the past decade, 33% for arts organizations with budgets over $200,000. What's more, the waning of arts education in schools over the past 3 decades means that both younger and middle-aged audiences are less familiar with some art forms and need to be introduced. All this in the face of an increasing pace of technological change and competition for scarce leisure time. Even when arts organizations succeed in attracting new audiences, there's no guarantee they'll return. An influential study by the League of American Orchestras found that 9 out of 10 people attending a concert for the first time don't return the following season. And from one season to the next, 57% of the people in the audience are different. In a recent survey we conducted, arts leaders said that building audiences is among their top challenges, second only to revenue. Of course, the two are closely linked. About half of revenue is from ticket sales, with the rest from contributions, which in turn is tied to attendance. So it's no surprise that a nonprofit finance fund survey earlier this year found that nearly half of all arts organizations said that achieving long-term stability is their #1 concern. The implication from these surveys is clear. There's great interest among arts leaders in effective audience-building strategies that allow their organizations to thrive, not just survive, in this evolving landscape. To rise to this challenge, artistically excellent organizations across the country are undertaking new and vibrant approaches to programming, presentation, and outreach without dumbing down. Arts service organizations representing the various disciplines have also made audience building a priority, and so have foundations, including Mellon, Doris Duke, and Knight, in addition to Wallace. We know that success is possible, even in this challenging environment. Arts organizations in our prior audience building initiative, the Wallace Excellence Awards, have demonstrated this. Among 46 organizations, those seeking to grow their overall audience saw substantial gains of 27% in 3 years. Those focusing on growing specific segments, like young adults, saw even larger gains of 60%. The strategies behind the success of 10 of these organizations are captured in a new study we're releasing today that is available as a free download from our website. It's called The Road to Results: Effective Practices for Building Arts Audiences. Now, these results are encouraging, but much less is known about how audience building efforts can contribute to the long-term vitality of arts organizations. And that's why I'm pleased to announce a new Wallace Foundation initiative. We will invest $40 million over the next 6 years to help ensure that performing arts organizations can attract new audiences while retaining their current ones and do so in ways that keep these organizations strong. And that's why we're calling this effort Building Audiences for Sustainability. About 25 organizations will receive significant 4-year grants to engage new audiences with the goal of contributing to their long-term financial health. The artistic and the administrative sides of the house will work together to support new programming, new works of art, presentations in new venues, and innovative engagement strategies. To help us select our partners for this initiative, we've asked arts leaders and other informants across the country to nominate outstanding performing arts organizations that are doing some of the country's most promising work in engaging new audiences. We expect to invite about 80 organizations to submit proposals and to select about 25 that will reflect a mix of disciplines, size, geography, and audience focus. As in all of our work, we have two aims. We want to help the limited number of organizations we have the resources to fund directly to strengthen their audience building work. At the same time, we want to gather and share evidence from their experience to help a larger number of organizations across the field be more effective in their own efforts. So we are commissioning an independent study to capture credible evidence about what works, what doesn't, and why, through reports, tools, and guides. We're partnering with arts service organizations in chamber music, dance, opera, museums, orchestra, presenting organizations, and theater to encourage the spread of practical solutions across the fields they serve. And we hope to reach future leaders by making these reports accessible to graduate students in arts management programs. The insights gained from working together with our partners over the next 6 years have the potential to help all arts organizations develop the capacity to continuously adapt to shifts in a complex and evolving landscape, with the ultimate goal of giving more people the benefits that only the arts can provide. The health of the arts sector is vital to the health of our society, and together we can make our national heartbeat even stronger. Thank you, and I'm pleased now to turn it over to Kurt Andersen.
Thank you, Will. And thank you, the Wallace Foundation, for convening this, asking me to be part of it. I'm very pleased by that. And I also want to thank my colleagues at WNYC and the Green Space for providing this great space, which is familiar to me, although I've never seen such a well-dressed crowd in this hall. I am here really because a $40 million initiative for the arts is an exciting prospect under any circumstances. Under these circumstances, which is to say, the Wallace Foundation is not just giving 25 organizations fish, they are teaching them smarter ways to fish and learning smarter ways to fish and teaching other people who aren't part of those 25 how to fish smarter. And because of this extraordinary group to my left and your right, who is here to discuss how this works in the real world. To my immediate left is Jane Chu, who is the new chairperson of the National Endowment for the Arts. She has been in her job a very brief time. In fact, I think we can count it in weeks, 3 months. But for most of the last decade, she knows of what she speaks because she has been president and CEO of the gorgeous and enormous new Kaufman Center for the Performing Arts in my second hometown of Kansas City, which was designed by Moshe Safdie, and which houses the companies of the Kansas City Ballet, the Kansas City Symphony, and the Lyric Opera, for which she raised $400-odd million and built the thing. Also, I should mention, although she had nothing to do with the grants that Studio 360 receives from the NEA, thanks. To her left is Robert Battle, who is not only the best-looking member of the panel, male member of the panel. He's a former dancer. He's a choreographer, and he had his own company for the better part of a decade called Battleworks, before becoming 3 years ago the artistic director of the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater. He is, in fact, only the third director in that amazing institution's 56 years of existence. To his left Further down the line is Jim Houghton, who 23 years ago, when he must have been a boy, founded the Signature Theater Company, which is, those of you who know theater in New York will know that it's one of the premier and important theater companies in the city. He is its artistic director. It was and is the first nonprofit American theater to devote each season to the work of a single living playwright. And he's directed many shows there. He too, like the Kaufman Center, has a fab new facility on West 42nd Street. His designed by another starchitect, Frank Gehry, with 3 theaters and rehearsal spaces and an extraordinary public space. Go if you haven't. And finally, on my extreme left at the end of the line is Kelly Tweedale, who is executive director of the Seattle Opera. She seems to have done everything at the Seattle Opera before she became the head of it. Everything maybe but sing, but I could be wrong about that.
No, I haven't sung.
Before that, she worked at the symphonies, the Seattle Symphony and the Cleveland Symphony as well. So these are people who know the hard facts of what we're talking about. And taking off from Will's remarks earlier, so we're discussing why growing audiences matters more now than perhaps ever as America becomes more diverse, as many existing audiences are aging. Of course, we're all aging, but what we mean, of course, is the average age of a given audience aging as well, and that there's more competition than ever, as Will mentioned, for leisure time. So how do all these hundreds of organizations, these proliferating organizations, both produce excellent performing art and market it in ways that keep current audiences happy and bring in new people, and do all that in ways that are not just a one-shot effort, but sustainable year after year? So we're trying to do today, really in a brief time and in a small way, what the New Wallace Initiative is doing in a big long-term way, which is talking about effective real-world ideas and practices that are developed and have been developed and will be developed, not just on the basis of gut and instinct and seat of the pants, all of which I'm a big believer in, but I'm also a believer in empirical information and rigor and data and evidence. And those two shouldn't be and aren't mutually exclusive. And then sharing those new solutions in a kind of, I guess, this is the beginning of an open source arts management discussion. My first question is for Chairwoman Chu, if I may call you that. One of the essential things that the NEA has done and does is to track the overall state of audiences and consumption of art, and who's going to the theater and who's seeing opera and who's attending dance events, all that. Will mentioned in his introduction that your data shows that audiences are shrinking, but I want the bigger view of what are audiences for the arts doing now, and how has it changed in terms of what you've seen in your 3 months running the federal government's arts programs?
Thanks, Kurt. Well, that's exactly the conversations that we have a lot in terms of the amount of participation that Americans have in the nation in terms of the arts. And the bottom line answer is the traditional ways that people have participated, while they're still there, they're expanding tremendously. Through our survey for public participation in the arts, which is going to be released in January, we've had some new findings that I think will have some implications for cultural providers and all of us. So the bottom line is they've expanded in a couple of ways that we can give you examples. Technology is booming, and American adults, 3/4 of American adults now, we're finding, participate in viewing the arts or listening to art through electronic media. That is about 167 million people who use that actively. Another thing that is changing and shifting are the demographics. So non-white and Hispanic individuals, while they're holding steady or increasing their participation in the arts. And finally, something to pay attention to is that the types of arts are expanding as well. So in addition to what we have been looking at for decades in terms of the traditional ways, there are Certainly, we talked about electronic, the creation of videos. American adults are now playing more instruments. They're going to festivals, folk festivals. Social dancing is now one to track as well. So those give implications about how cultural providers meet the audiences where they are.
So I'm not surprised. It sounds like you think the glass is half full rather than half empty on audiences.
What the main thing is to do is not be stuck in the old ways of saying what we've done is this is the way we've always done it before, but to really make increasing numbers is great, but increasing relevance is critical.
And presumably when we talk about these vast numbers of people who consume things electronically, we as providers of, in this room and on this panel, of live entertainment, want that to be a kind of entryway taste to going out and seeing things rather than being just sitting at home on your couch and watching videotapes.
Well, that's exactly right. We think it's a both and. So we'd be in a danger if we said it's either this or it's that. It can truly be an entry point to opening up more. It's on a continuum of participation, and the initial data we have seen does say exactly that. An initial putting your toe in the water, possibly by electronic means, going to see the live one is adding to the full experience.
I want to, before I ask each of you some specific questions about your experiences and organizations, I want to pose a couple of questions that I wish any or all of you to address. Our big question here is obviously how to get more people to see the work you put on. There are two parts of that. There is the strictly financial part. You know, let's sell more tickets and make more money and keep doing what we're doing. And then the mission-driven part of it, which is about the new audiences. And what we tend to mean is the more young audiences, more non-white audiences, more non-affluent audiences to see the theater and music and dance that you put on. How do those contradict each other? Are they in competition with each other? How do they interconnect?
Well, I'll say, I think there's an intersection from program to accessibility to the program. And that if you want to expand those audiences and broaden your base, and for me, new audiences include all segments that you mentioned, and older audiences too. I mean, because there's a whole class of folks who have no disposable income and no access. So for me, the model that I hope and shoot for at Signature is that you take any single subway car, you pull it out and you pour the people on the table, and you hope that's who you're speaking to and making the work accessible to. And in order to do that, you have to, from our perspective, break down the economic barrier to start with, create enough of an intimate experience that they feel relevant to it, and then tell stories that are relevant to them. And so to me, and then to your point about electronic invitations for perhaps a younger segment, a whole generation that's come up in a digital age, that's at one invitation, but also as a book is an invitation too. And so to marry those two things, I really like what Jane said about it's both and. You know, it really is. It's all of those things. But without true access, and to me access is related to multiple things. One is access literally to the building, but also in the economic sense. The rest is a non-starter. And if you're not telling stories in your stages or whatever particular art form that we're representing that are relevant to these audiences that you seek to create and expand, then that's a non-starter too. So to me, it's a marriage of all those things, of program to understanding where you're coming from as an organization in terms of mission and who is it that you're trying to service.
Ticket prices obviously are an obvious barrier when they are too high, and lots of people can't afford or aren't going to try something that they've never done if it costs them $100. But it seems to me there are more ineffable, less quantifiable barriers as well, like an opera? Me? Really? I don't know. I don't get that. Kelly, how do you work to convince the unconverted that opera may be for them, for instance?
Well, I think first of all, you have to boil it down to what do we have all in common? I think a lot of times opera gets put on a pedestal, and it's something that you have to learn your way into or earn your way into. And really, opera is just telling a story through music. And so once you actually use that as your parameter, it takes you, it doesn't mean you have to be in a big theater. It doesn't mean that you're putting together lavish sets all the time. It really changes the paradigm. And being from Seattle, we talk about being a community of fanatical fans. And so when I think about barriers, a lot of times I think about in our city, both the Sounders football club, which is soccer, which soccer never used to be something that anybody ever paid attention to, and now it is the hottest ticket, and they're filling 60,000 people in a stadium, and what can we learn from that? And I look at Little League. I look at they have ways to participate, which is in the community, in their neighborhood, in their schools. It is prevalent in any kind of digital media, whether it's online or on television, and they make it something that is accessible. And so for opera, what we really look at is how do we get into the community? How do we immerse ourselves in telling stories at the very basic level, and not the stories we want to tell? What are the stories that the community wants to tell? And we've had a lot of traction just recently doing a crowdsourced new commission where the theme of the opera actually came from a crowdsourced process. So, and it changed who showed up for the workshop. It changed who was interested in the work. It changed who thought they were interested in opera. So I think when we talk about relevance, we actually have to get out of our institutions and into the community.
And may I ask, what did the crowd source as this opera?
Still in development, but it came from the question that our education director, Susan Elliott, posed to groups of people, was if you had to leave your home suddenly, what is the most precious belonging or object would you take with you, and why? And we captured these all in video. And one of the stories had to do with the Japanese internment that happened in Seattle and Bainbridge Island, and it was about a doll and what that signified. And that became the germ of an opera that has been in production and takes place in our home, and it has brought a whole range of voices to the table that traditionally wouldn't have been at the opera table.
That's fantastic. Robert Battle, you, the Alvin Ailey Company was an important institution before you were born. It was run by Mr. Ailey for 30-odd years, then by his protege Judith Jameson for 20-odd years. And now by you've worked with them as a choreographer and artist in residence, but you must have to be considered, compared to them, an outsider, 2 generations younger. And I think this is an important thing beyond the Ailey Company, because I think so many arts organizations need to figure out the successor generations to the charismatic founders. You are that successor generation. Given that I expect part of your brief is, let's do something new. Let's not just keep doing what the Ailey Company has always done. But you have this institution, this repertory. Mm-hmm. Is balancing those two things as you try to get new audiences and do new things with fulfilling the expectations that already exist a big issue for you?
Right. I think, and thanks for noting that how young I am. First of all.
Yeah.
And handsome.
And handsome.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
you got it all in.
Yeah.
Scoring, brother.
Doing my best.
We
doing
can
my
go
best.
home now. I think, though, it's for me, I always use the phrase past, present, and future, but not seeing them as separate things. Like you said, it's not an either or. And so I think about the legacy of Alvin Ailey, and I am a part of that legacy because he wanted a company that embraced more than his own creativity, but he used his creativity to bring others along, which is why we had an Ailey School almost from the beginning, why arts and education was important to him, not just a way to fundraise, but it was really about spiritual reciprocity. Growing up as a black man in this country, knowing something about bringing the community along with you. And so I feel that I'm one of those people that he was thinking of, even though we didn't know each other. So I think that's where I lead from, that sense that I'm doing exactly what he envisioned, which is why they chose me in the first place. And so I think as long as I have that, I mean, every now and then I'll make some choices that might be questionable, and I'm sure I'll hear the questions. But at the same time, I think the overarching message of the company feels very much a note that I try to strike in everything that I do.
Given that the Ailey Company began as obviously the place where a great artist could do his work, but about black dancers, black choreographers, presumably, and I know, healthy, robust black audience for all of its existence, it makes the idea of audience building different for you. So what are the new audiences that you need or want to attract as director of the Alvin Ailey Company?
Well, I think the wonderful thing is our audience is so diverse in so many ways. I think if I look at it, I look at Revelations that seemingly speak to one people. It is about the African American experience in this country, but it turns out to be a universal expression.
Which is a dance by Alvin Ailey.
Created in 1960 by Alvin Ailey. If you haven't seen it, we'll be at City Center in December. So I think that's the reason our audience is so diverse. I think the wonderful thing is that with technology, we're able to use data to personalize how we reach audience members, so that it's not a one-size-fits-all, that we understand the who, what, when, where, and how.
Give me an example of that.
So the notion of, well, what programs does someone consistently come to see? When do they buy their tickets, and how do they get their tickets? What are they interested in? You know, it's a development tool, but I think now with technology, we're able to really look more closely at that. And then the other thing is making sure that the creativity doesn't stop on the stage, but that the creativity exists with the administration, with development, with how we use technology. Because I'm a little bit of a Luddite, you know.
Even though you're young.
Even though I'm youngish. But I think when I think about dancers, I mean, we use every limb that we have in order to reach the audience. And so if you think of the technology as another limb and you humanize it, I think that's important. I mean, it's important to get butts in the seat, but to make them understand why they're important, not just why we're important.
Kelly, what Robert said echoed something very interesting that I hadn't thought of explicitly until we were speaking before preparing for this conversation, which is that we are arts organizations. We're all about innovation, taking risks, taking chances, and that needs to extend throughout these enterprises. Talk about that.
Yeah, I think that it started with, I'm always just taken that we have this really robust process that we go to produce our art, and the rehearsal process, and we're allowed to take chances and risks and see if they work before they ever get to the stage. And that's what it's all about. We're nimble, we're flexible, and I know at the opera we do that all the time. And then in rehearsals, if somebody laughs at the wrong time, you got to change that. You change that staging, and it's just second nature. And then we look at how we run our organizations, and it is so rigid and it is so risk averse because we don't have an opportunity to take a breath and try something new because the stakes are so high financially. And so we were talking about this, and I think I'm here as one of the Wallace grantees from the work that they did in their Excellent Awards. And what was really remarkable about that funding is that they built in a research element, and that you were measuring and you were encouraged to make course corrections along the way. And it was really life-changing for our organization. We had our 4 sets of experiments on building new audiences, and it allowed us to actually say, oh, we got this wrong, and oh, we got that right, and let's build upon that for the next year. And it showed up in the numbers of who was showing up, and we got actually much more facile at measuring our own work, taking chances, being able to do course corrections without thinking that we were putting something at peril. And so in our organization, we have started to talk about how do we become as nimble as we are on the producing stage, producing art, in the work that we do. And I think it's critical for going forward. I really do, because we have to take chances. That's what, using technology, it's changing at such a rapid rate that if we stay with what we know, we will always be behind.
And the Wallace Excellence Award process allowed you to feel freer to experiment because they were providing some money, presumably, but also because there was somebody there giving you the tools to sort of figure out what was working, what wasn't. Talk about that.
Let me just talk about three aspects that our organization found really different. The first was that you developed what your experiments were going to be in partnership with Wallace, and then they brought experts in the research field to help build your research plan that was specific to your project. But because they had invested in a region, there was similarities, and so actually in Seattle, I don't know if all cities did this, we actually shared our research with each other. There were 9 of us, and we put some similar questions in our research so we could see as a region what we could learn from each other. So that was helpful. But it also was encouraged that if your results show you something different than what you're planning in your next stage, talk to us. Do a course correction. We want you to be successful. And this was all about getting more people to engage with our organization. And so we did that. We actually flip-flopped our year 3 with year 4. This was actually between 2008 and 2012. So it was when everything that we known economically within this country was crumbling. This was the one initiative that actually we were able to complete with course corrections, but make major ground because it had that flexibility in it. That we weren't held to one idea and one theory. It had to be proved through the evidence, and so it has created. Actually, we're in the process of creating a framework of how to measure all of our work. In an evidence-based system. It's not the only criteria, but it's one criteria that we will continue to look at a consistent basis to be able to say whether we're moving the needle. And I think one element that I will say that we were encouraged to use, not only the statistical survey type of research, but behavioral research. We did a lot of observation, and we took that observation and those notes and we codified with researchers to teach us how to do that. And that has actually moved the needle much more strongly than what people say. We've been really focusing to pay attention of what people do. It's different.
You mean how they act at the opera, or what they buy tickets to?
Both. What they say they're going to do, and then we track them and see what they really do, what they say they like, and then whether their behavior participates in that way. We also, even we just did an open house where we had monitors in every room that were spending, how much time was someone spending with a certain activity? When were people getting bored? When were we engaging them? When were we not? And actually taking that and having it in a systemized form so that we can actually get better and pay attention when we're engaging audiences. We also did the survey, and they'll tell us when they thought they were engaged, and we'll compare it to the behavioral notes and see if it's the same. Our experience so far is that the behavioral research has been much more accurate to predict what people are going to do than what people think they're going to do.
Surveillance in the interest of art. I like it. Jim Houghton, seeing you sitting next to Robert Battle, I'm wondering, as the Alvin Ailey of theater in some measure in New York, if you've thought about a successor 20 years hence or whenever you plan to name a successor, but I'm more interested in what you've tried to do, not so much about any individual who might replace you one day, but in creating a paradigm and a philosophy that will, you're trying to make sure, outlive you and be there forever, which is to say, began with this ticket initiative. Talk about what that is, how you got there, and if it has been as successful as one would think in
the ticket
building
initiative itself, or
the ticket initiative itself, and then this longer term intent to make affordable tickets.
Well, I mean, it's important, I think, to say that the ticket initiative is not who we are, it's part of who we are. It's an access point, and it's directly tied into our core values and mission. You know, you talked about community, and Robert talked about the human sort of scale, making this accessible on that level too. And for me, the art itself is a deeply personal experience. And the company was founded on a basic core value of taking an individual each year, in our case was a writer, and exploring a body of work, digging in, creating a context, and honoring that person.
Which must have been a risky decision at the beginning.
Well, it was an organic one because I had worked with a writer who I felt was a significant writer who was completely misunderstood and operating in a hit or miss ethic. And we wanted to contextualize that author and to be able to say, this is a full-bodied human being. It's not a name on a piece of paper. You're going to meet this person. You're going to understand the diversity within their own canon of work. You're going to see something new of that person. And we're going to engage that artist in the process completely. So it started with a personal place, and that's where it's continued. So if anything, I think the thing that has tied all of what we do together is this deeply personal commitment to the individual and to honoring that individual and their participation. And my contention is since we were founded with that sort of core value, is that if you are part of honoring that individual, you're also part of the possibility and the potential of being honored yourself, and that your participation matters. And so for me, that's translated in a scale of building that's this, full city, New York City block, but it's made up of intimate experiences. The theaters are small, the lobby is expansive, but everyone collects in that lobby. The theater is reflective about that personal connection I'm talking about. I want artists and audience to breathe the same air, and I want them to just viscerally know that. So the intimacy is important. It's also possible. It makes it possible for us to have expansive kinds of programming and make choices that maybe others couldn't make because they have to fill seats in a different sort of way. And then the lobby itself. So I view the venue, the spaces, as a place where that intersection happens with those particular bodies of work, or whether we're making a body of work with the Residency 5 program with writers in residence for 5 years. But the lobby is trying to address the why. Why do we go? And to me, the lobby is, and back of house, by the way, is all built around this notion of orchestrated collisions. We are creating multiple invitations for people to collide with one another. And that might mean a digital experience for that generation that's coming up, which is certainly part of all of us now, where they're intersecting with oversized iPads that go into a deep history of who we are. Or it might be directly across from it, the bookstore, where they pick up a piece of paper and read words on a page. Or it might be at the bar where they're having a glass of wine, or the cafe, or soup or something, or just sitting and relaxing. They're all engaging with one another. And if you create the diverse experience on those stages, and all these audiences, which we start all curtain times at the same time, collide in that communal space, then we're creating the potential for each person to realize that they have something to do with this, and they're valued in it, and it's personal for them. The trick is, and we also mirror that, by the way, behind the stage, so that in our back of house, we have shared spaces, that we have rehearsal spaces, 2 theaters sharing back of house. You're never in a situation where you can navel gaze. You're never closing in on yourself because you're turning a quarter and colliding with that other artist or that other experience. So these are all the principles that are alive in the programming. And for me, talking about succession, my deepest hope and wish is that those core values remain central, and that that can be deployed by other great folks coming in, inhabiting that mission, taking it, carrying that ball, very much what Robert just talked about, where he is honoring that legacy, but because of Robert, of who he is as a person, his development, and his honoring, his instinct to honor, is carrying that ball forward in his own way, in an organic way. So all those things collide. I think it's essential that that those core tenets remain.
And by having your ticket initiative, I just want to have you to discuss that briefly, saying people that can only afford $25 can come to the theater for a night. That has obviously brought in new audiences. That has effectively lowered that barrier. For your bottom line generally, has that worked out okay?
Well, here's the interesting thing about it. First of all, to talk about pre-ticket initiative, and I think generally what a lot of us confront when we either take our family or a partner or something to an event, and it's costing us, a lot of money in New York, for a family of 4 to go to the theater on Broadway, that's, after dinner and parking and, you're talking about close to $1,000 for that moment. So people are subconsciously, I think, sitting there and thinking this better be good, And when you take that economic
I don't know if
piece-
it's subconscious.
yeah. You're absolutely right about that. But when we inserted this principle of the ticket initiative, which was an organic outgrowth of all these other things I talked about, was that it turned into, I got in. So the seats were filled, and people were sitting there in an intimate setting, knowing that their participation was honored, knowing that they had an access point, and feeling a sense of exploration. But what's been very interesting is the person who's sitting in the chair next to the person who maybe couldn't afford it before is giving back because they like that it's democratized. They like that it's a human experience. They like that it's accessible, and that ultimately they want to pay that forward. And so when we reach out and ask, and speaking of data, we did an enormous amount of data on this. We've been doing this initiative now for 9 years. We've surveyed, we've had outside resources come in. During those rough years that you were just talking about, across the country, primarily, in all areas of fundraising, in terms of individual, corporate, foundation, and government, and institutional giving, were either flatlined or below the line during that 5-year period. And these are statistics that are drawn from, in our case, the Theater Communications Group. In our time, we expanded anywhere from 40 to 60% in all of those categories. And that's because, I think, of the initiative and all those other points.
Jane, this is under your brief as chair of the NEA, but also running the Kaufman Center and all these fancy, opera company, ballet company, the rest. What was your sense? What is your sense of what the greatest challenges, barriers to new audiences coming in? Is it ticket price? Is it these are a bunch of snobs and I'm a regular person? What are the challenges?
Well, speaking to the survey of public participation in the arts that's going to be released in January, there's a new question on there that may directly address what you just said in terms of the barriers, and it also speaks to what my colleagues were saying in terms of Kelly and the behavior watching, and Jim, the colliding in the lobby, and Robert, the administration that you have to attend to as well in terms of putting everything together. Because the question on the survey was, why didn't you go? Why didn't you participate? So they segmented, this survey segmented, in addition to all Americans and how much they participated, there was this one group, about 30%, who said they wanted to go, they liked the arts, but they didn't go. So the question was, well, why didn't you? And there were 3 findings. And one was as simple as at least 2/3 of those who said, and that's about 30 million people. No, I mean 30%, that's about 11 million people. So one of the findings was they had children under 6. So that's a pretty significant amount. The finding may help all of us understand the opportunity to present family-friendly experiences, something more accessible that way. Another finding was accessibility. There were many who said the destination was hard to get to. Things like that. It wasn't about the art itself. It was the destination was hard to get to. Those were mostly retired persons, people with some physical challenges that had not been addressed in terms of how they could get to the place and the location. And then the third and final one was what you're talking about in terms of the colliding in the lobby. They saw this as an opportunity to socialize too. And so if there wasn't anybody to go to the arts event with them or the production, they didn't go. So here are 3 non-arts barriers that are keeping, and it's an opportunity to figure out how to either go to where they are or find a way to make art really easy and accessible to get to.
Well, in that third point, it sounds like it's a perfect thing to address in terms of social media. I mean, if social media is about forming online communities, well, they can become real communities if you find those 4 people to go to the opera or go to the theater with or go to the dance.
Well, it may be indeed, and the opportunity also to be very clever. And here we are in the whole field of creativity and innovation. We have the opportunity to be clever on how to make the art accessible, social media or any other way.
Robert, I read when I was doing my research that when you took over 3.5 years ago at the Ailey Company, the company was running a 7-figure annual surplus, which, congratulations, Alvin Ailey Company. On that, did the fact that it was a financially robust enterprise, to the points that Jim and Kelly have talked about, make you feel freer to experiment? That it wasn't all about, oh my God, how are we going to open the doors next week?
Yes, I mean, and certainly having run, you said earlier, BattleWorks, which I always have to give my mother credit because she came up with the name, BattleWorks. I mean, when you're, and most people know this, I mean, when you're sort of using airplane glue to hold the thing together and not sure if you're going to make payroll, and then you have to get in the studio and create on dancers that you're asking so much from, it's hard not to feel a little bit guilty when your choreography is like mine and you're slamming yourself into the floor, and then you can't pay them. So sorry. So yes, I mean, certainly I felt that sense of being more free to look at things creatively without sort of worrying about that. But on the flip side, you're finding something in such good condition that you hope that whatever you do, you leave it in good condition or even better than that. And so there's the pressure on either side. But you know, that's what we do as performers.
And did running your own airplane glue, wire and rubber band operation, did that prepare you for this big deal?
Absolutely, because insofar as I'm the artistic director, as I look at it, Bennett Rink, the executive director, I'm very much aware of all of the other jobs that people do in order to make sure that when we are on the stage that we're free to do what we do. And I think because I was in some ways doing all of the jobs, or at least very much aware of them, it made me able to appreciate the jobs more, and also to say, well, I'm just going to do what I do best and focus on that.
Before I open the questions to members of the audience and the Twitter sphere, I would be remiss, Jane, if I didn't ask you about the challenges facing NEA. I like all good people, wish the NEA's budget were much larger than it is. But when I was doing my research, I saw that if it had just kept steady with inflation over the last 35 years, it would now be your budget would be $500 million,
Wow.
which it is not, as you know. It's less than a third of that. Given the constrained capacity, do you have a sense of how, using all that we're talking about here, experiments, innovation, and so forth, how the NEA should best leverage the dollars it does have in performing arts?
Well, two things come to mind, and one of them really lies at what you just said in terms of leverage. So from an operating model, we are pleased to be able to say there is great leverage in the way the grants are made. Since NEA grants require a one-to-one match of other dollars, they're sometimes local municipalities, they are certainly private philanthropy businesses, and what that does is more than match the dollars. And in fact, by the way, the dollars in reality are matched 9 by now. So there's a 1 to 9 match that's really a big bang for your buck. But it also brings many partners together, and that's what we wanted. So from that point of view, we make the best use of the NEA funds that we can. The other piece, though, is that in this budget environment, we're appreciative of the budget being able to be held steady. So it was $146 million last year, it's $146 million this year, and there is a proposed for next year in the Senate, a proposed draft budget, hasn't been voted on yet, that is upping the budget by $4 million. So we are moving in the right direction.
And do you, as chair, get to say, less for visual art, more for theater? I mean, is that part of your?
The process is a three-part process, and we're the first people who read the grants, the applications that come in are the citizens. So we pull together, and many have been on citizen panels in this room. They're the ones to really make the decisions because you know the nuances in the field, you know what the dynamics are, and those citizens respond to criteria, whether the applications are excellent and whether they have merit. And based upon that, in terms of their knowledge of defining excellence and merit in the arts, they vote and discuss. It goes to a second phase out of three, which is that we have a second set of the National Council on the Arts, who are other experts in the field we bring together, and they do the same thing. So we really feel like, and then the third is the chairman. So we really feel like that three-part process says that we're all shaping the arts together. in
Not
the
quite
nation.
crowdsourced, but in that direction.
We certainly depend on their
Yeah.
opinions.
Now if any of you here in the audience or you at home have questions, we would love to entertain them. If anybody has one, if you can wait for the person with the microphone who's right behind you to give you the microphone.
Hi there, this is Catherine Heidemann with the Master of Arts Management program at Carnegie Mellon University. This isn't addressed toward anyone in particular, but I was just curious if anyone on the panel would comment on if there might be any barriers, if the barriers to participation might vary between the visual and performing arts.
Jane, you're the chair
I
of the
would
NEA.
say, I think I'm confident that they do. In the performing arts, one of the dynamics is that we're all experiencing it at the same time together. So there's a social element because time is part of the production. And in the visual arts, that can also be the case, but in some cases you may be able to come back and see the same exhibit another time, and there's different dynamics. So do they differ? Probably so. But that speaks to what my colleagues have said before, and that is if you're really paying attention to the relevance of your art and how it has that relationship with whomever is participating, that's the key thing. So the answer is probably absolutely.
And for better or worse, you can leave a gallery more easily than you can walk out of a theater. Are there any other, right here, is this Twitter sphere speaking to me over there?
It is. This comes from Twitter. Liliana Dirksku asks, should the results of audience data, what they like and buy, influence programming? And she asks this of Kelly.
I believe that you have an artistic director for a purpose. It is to, curate the art and to be provocative. If we were entertainment solely, perhaps you would do what movies and television have been doing for decades of taking polls and figuring out how a movie should end. I do think that we are still art, and that having the dialogue with the audience actually helps us remain relevant. If we have a purpose in delivering a provocative statement or an emotion, how do we know whether we've hit the mark, whether we know we've had an impact? And I think the dialogue with the audiences allow us to figure out where we're hitting, where we're missing, and our audiences are creative as well, and they have ideas. They're bringing ideas to the table, and how that shows up in our work is up to the artists and the creative team. But definitely, that dialogue is important. But I do feel that curation process, especially if you want to be more than entertainment, is critical.
But you told me when we spoke before that it was the audience and through research who let you know, we'd like to see behind the scenes stuff.
Right.
And so you went and made videos about the making of opera.
Right. And I'll just talk shortly about that. We have this mystique that in many of our art forms is that we have to keep that moment for the live performance. And if people know the magic behind that moment, they no longer will experience it in the same way. Our audiences are changing. They are absolutely hungry to know how the magic, how it's working. How do you do that? It actually engages them more, it makes their experience deeper and more relevant and more meaningful to them. And so we've done a 180-degree turnaround on this idea of mystique. And we've opened up almost every process of what we do because it's a creative process. And that is as meaningful to some of our audience as the performance itself.
We've, just to add to that for a second, we've actually built that into the architecture. In that shared lobby, when we're loading a set in, we're all out. Everything loads through the lobby. It's open all day long. You'll sit there today, and there's a load-in going in one of the theaters. There's a rehearsal going in. But one of the interesting things I think we did was we made the front door the stage door, so that every single participant in that building, whether you're staff, your artists, your audience, you collide with each other. You have to pass through the same social space.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
We have time, I guess, for one quick question, and the gentleman here to whom the microphone is now going and has arrived.
Larry Epstein from the Arts Management Program at Drexel University. I'm wondering about partnerships between nonprofit organizations and for-profit organizations to bring arts to underserved areas. I'm thinking particularly there's a company that works with the Metropolitan Opera and other arts organizations to provide live simulcasts into movie theaters. Do you see that as an area for growth in terms of cooperation, or do you see that as just a limited experiment?
I'll talk from the idea. I think partnerships are critical, whether it's between nonprofits or for-profits. I think the key is in the partnership. If there is something that both organizations are stronger because of it, we are contemplating co-locating ourselves with a public television station, and we actually, the dialogue isn't are we both fitting on the same piece of development property. The conversation is, how is each organization stronger if we actually work together and in a co-located fashion? How could television digitally change what opera was about, and how would opera change how a public television is able to connect live with their viewers? And so for me, I'd say it depends on the partnerships, but getting partnerships together, I think it's the future.
Kelly Tweedale, thank you very much. We could go on all afternoon. I want to thank Kelly, Jim Houghton, Robert Battle, and Jane Chu for their participation. Please give them a round of applause. And I want to thank Will Miller and the Wallace Foundation for letting me be part of their party. And here is Mr. Will Miller once again.
Well, I want to add my personal thanks to Kurt Andersen, Jane Chu, Robert Battle, Jim Houghton, and Kelly Tweedale for a very stimulating discussion about building audiences. There were just a couple things that struck me about it. One was I kept flashing on E.M. Forrester's imperative for all art: only connect. As technology challenges us, as audience development or audience changes challenge us, remaining relevant and remaining connected to audiences seems to be the central challenges. After all, these great art forms arose because they were relevant and because they connected to audiences. And the challenge is figuring out how to continue doing that. I'm very encouraged by the idea of creativity not stopping at the edge of the stage, but informing the entire organization as they rise to those kinds of challenges. So thank you for being part of the audience here in the green space, and all of you who've tuned in via live stream. I think all of us have a sense of optimism from the discussion that success in audience building is possible. At the same time, it's also clear we've heard a collective sense of urgency, because there's a great deal to learn about how arts organizations can thrive in this challenging environment. Our co-founder, Lila Atchison Wallace, remarked more than once, the arts belong to everyone. And our new initiative, Building Audiences for Sustainability, is one of the ways the Wallace Foundation is honoring her legacy today. So ultimately, if the exemplary arts organizations we fund can experiment with new approaches to audience building, and if we can capture and share what works and what doesn't, in ways that many more organizations can benefit from, then we can add continued life to Lila's ideal and help more people reap the benefits of the arts, and that's why we're here. Thank you very much.
across the country and around the world for watching, and I encourage you to keep track of how this Wallace Initiative goes and who gets the money and what great work comes out of it. Thank you all very, very much. This is Kurt Andersen signing off from the green space at WNYC in New York. And all of